My name is Landry Ramsey. I'm 34 now. 8 years ago, in that airless conference room on the 7th floor overlooking the Mississippi in New Orleans, my parents looked me dead in the eye and said, "We will hand the family company to your younger brother to take over, and you will have to manage everything on your own." My 22-year-old brother leaned back in the chair and added with a lazy grin, "Start learning how to make money." I didn't say a word. I stood up, walked out, and never came back. 8 years of complete silence later, my phone started blowing up at 2 in the morning. My mother was hysterical. "Landry, the company is finished. 8.4 million in tax debt. The IRS is taking everything. Only you can save us," I let her finish. Then I answered calm and clear, "I am learning how to make money." Click. If you've ever been told you weren't worth keeping around by the same people, now begging for your help, drop a comment below and hit that subscribe button because you're about to watch the daughter they threw away walk back in, holding the one thing they need the most. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds in my Dallas apartment as I sat down with a cup of coffee and pulled up my old notes from that day 8 years ago. I had just turned 26, armed with a fresh MBA from Tulane University, and stepped into the role of vice president at Ramsey Port Services with high hopes. The company, built by my parents from scratch in the early 90s, specialized in container shipping and warehousing along the busy Mississippi ports in New Orleans. With annual revenue around $40 million and a team of 130 dedicated employees, it felt like the perfect place to apply everything I had learned. I had spent summers interning there, knowing the ins and outs of logistics from dock schedules to supplier contracts, and everyone from the forklift operators to the office staff recognized me as the one who would eventually lead. But that illusion shattered when my parents Calvin and Beverly Ramsey summoned a private family meeting in the boardroom on the 7th floor. They sat at the head of the table, papers spread out like a verdict, and declared they were retiring early to travel the Gulf Coast. Without warning, they revealed plans to transfer 100% of the shares to my younger brother, Sullivan Ramsey, who is only 22 and halfway through his undergraduate degree in business at Louisiana State University. To keep the banks and major clients calm during the transition, they retained their titles as chairman and CEO on all official documents for the first 24 months, but operational authority shifted to Sullivan right away. My access codes were revoked by noon, my company email locked, and I lost salary, corporate credit card, health coverage, even the reserved parking spot in the employee lot. They handed me a memo stating I had 72 hours to vacate my office and return any keys or equipment. The staff meeting the following afternoon turned into a spectacle. Sullivan addressed the entire team in the break room, his voice echoing off the concrete walls as he outlined his vision for growth. He paused midway, turned to me with a condescending smile, and announced in front of 120 employees, "Looks like my sister is going to have to figure out how to make money the hard way now." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, but most avoided my gaze, shuffling papers or staring at their shoes. The humiliation stung, but I held it together, packing my personal items into boxes, while conversations hushed around me. By sunset, I wheeled my single suitcase out of the building in the French Quarter, the sounds of jazz from nearby bars mixing with the hum of cargo trucks unloading at the docks. The valley contained a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and some notebooks from college. Nothing more. I hailed a cab to the bus station, not wanting to spend another night under the same roof. The decision felt final as the taxi pulled away, the city's vibrant lights fading in the rearview mirror. Arriving at the Greyhound terminal, I bought the cheapest ticket to Houston, a city where I had a distant cousin who might let me crash on her couch for a week. The bus ride stretched through the night, giving me time to process the betrayal. My parents had always favored Sullivan, the easygoing one who charmed clients with stories rather than spreadsheets, but I never expected them to erase me completely from the legacy I helped build. As the miles ticked by, I vowed to rebuild on my own terms without their name or money. 3 years after leaving New Orleans, I had already moved twice and rebuilt my life from nothing. Houston was the first stop. I rented a tiny studio in Midtown for $450 a month, sharing the bathroom with 3 other tenants. I worked 3 jobs at once mornings as a junior financial analyst at a small freight brokerage, earning $22 an hour afternoons, driving for a food delivery app, and late nights grading online finance courses for extra cash. Sleep became a luxury I scheduled in 4-hour blocks. Every spare dollar went into tuition for CFA Level 1 and an online tax law certificate. I passed both exams on the first try while living off rice and canned tuna. By the second year, the brokerage promoted me to senior analyst, but the salary still barely covered rent and student loans. I started noticing patterns in the distressed asset reports that crossed my desk: companies drowning in IRS liens, banks desperate to offload bad debt, and private buyers quietly scooping up warehouses and equipment for pennies on the dollar. The idea hit me hard. If I could learn to buy those liens myself, I could turn other people's disasters into my leverage. That same winter, I ran into my old college friend Nathan Holt at a CFA study group in Dallas. We had lost touch after graduation, but he remembered how I used to tear apart case studies in class. Over cheap coffee in a strip mall Starbucks, I laid out the plan: start a small distressed debt fund, focus exclusively on IRS tax liens and bank foreclosures, stay under the radar. Nathan had just finished his Series 65 license and was looking for something real to do with it. We shook on it that night. We launched Whitaker Capital 6 months later with $50,000 scraped together from our savings and a couple of silent investors Nathan knew from his old firm. To keep my name completely off every public document, we put everything under Richard Whitaker, a retired accountant Nathan trusted, and who was happy to be the face for a modest fee. I stayed the invisible partner, wiring money, running models, negotiating directly with IRS collection officers through encrypted email, but never signing a single page that could be traced back to the Ramsey family. The first deal closed 9 months in a failing trucking company in San Antonio with a $2.1 million tax lien. We bought the lien for $1.1 million cash, took ownership of 30 late-model tractors and a 10-acre yard, then flipped the equipment within 90 days for triple our money. The returns were obscene on paper, but completely legal, and more importantly, repeatable. Word spread quietly in the niche distressed debt circles. Banks started sending us term sheets before auctions even opened. Within 36 months, the fund crossed $60 million in assets under management without ever taking outside marketing money. I still lived in a modest 1-bedroom in uptown Dallas, drove a used Honda, and kept my name off the website. But the numbers in the offshore accounts told a different story. Every lien we purchased, every warehouse we seized and resold, felt like proof that I had learned exactly what they told me to learn. I never called home once during those 3 years. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not even when Grandma passed. Silence became my loudest weapon. 4 years after the fund crossed $60 million, the first real cracks back in New Orleans finally became impossible to hide. The first 2 years under Sullivan's control had actually looked solid from the outside. Mom and Dad were still listed as officers on every state filing, so the banks kept renewing the revolving credit line and major shipping contracts stayed in place. Revenue hovered around $42 million, payroll ran on time, and Sullivan threw big employee crawfish boils every spring and took pictures with politicians at the port. To anyone who didn't look too closely, Ramsey Port Services appeared to be growing. Then, year 3 arrived. Sullivan scheduled a family dinner at the house in the Garden District and slid resignation letters across the table for Mom and Dad to sign. He told them the banks wanted fresh leadership on paper and promised nothing would really change. They signed. The next week, every corporate document listed him as the sole officer and 100% owner. That same quarter, he personally guaranteed $28 million in new debt bank loans, equipment leases, supplier credit lines, all backed by the warehouse's cranes and the land itself. Money started disappearing fast. He bought a 75-foot Sunseeker yacht he docked at the Orleans Marina and named Ramsey Legacy II. He leased a penthouse on Canal Street, flew private to Las Vegas most months, and started showing up at the office in a different luxury watch every week. He opened 3 expansion offices in Baton Rouge, Mobile, and Gulfport that never handled a single container. Just rented storefronts with big signs and brand new Herman Miller chairs nobody ever sat in. Longtime employees started leaving. Dock foremen who had been with the company 20 years were handed 2 weeks severance and replaced with day labor paid under the table. Payroll taxes stopped being sent to the IRS on time. Suppliers demanded cash on delivery, so containers sat on the dock rotting while customers moved to competitors. Sullivan kept the worst news away from Mom and Dad by having all mail redirected to a post office box he controlled and telling them any delayed checks were just temporary cash flow timing. Every Christmas and every Thanksgiving, the same group FaceTime call came through. Mom would prop the phone on the kitchen island while Dad poured bourbon and bragged about the new cranes Sullivan just ordered or the huge contracts he landed. Sullivan would jump on camera from the yacht deck or a casino suite, flash his newest Rolex, then ask with that same smirk if I had finally found a real job or was still playing with spreadsheets. I kept my camera off, muttered that I was busy, and hung up after 20 seconds later. They never once asked what I actually did for a living. By year 6, the public records I tracked every month started lighting up missed property tax payments on the main terminal mechanics' liens, from unpaid crane repairs lawsuits from suppliers, and finally, the first federal tax lien filed in Orleans Parish for over $4 million in unpaid payroll taxes. Sullivan paid just enough each quarter to keep the IRS from knocking immediately, but the hole kept growing. I watched every filing from my office in Dallas, the same way I watched any other distressed asset. No anger, no satisfaction, just data points. Every missed payment, every new lien, every yacht payment traced back to the company account was simply confirmation that the lesson they wanted me to learn 8 years earlier had been learned very, very well. Last winter, the house of cards finally collapsed. It started when an IRS revenue officer auditing a routine extension request noticed signatures that didn't match the ones on file from years earlier. A deeper dive revealed Sullivan had been signing Mom and Dad's names on multiple quarterly filings to hide the growing shortfall. Within weeks, the case was escalated to the Criminal Investigation Division. In early March of this year, Special Agent Marcus Doyle showed up unannounced at the house in the Garden District with a thick envelope. Mom opened the door in her robe and called Dad down from his study. Doyle handed them the final notice of federal tax lien, $8.4 million in unpaid payroll income and excise taxes dating back 4 years, plus penalties and interest. The document gave them 30 days to pay or appeal before the IRS could begin seizing assets. That was the first time Mom and Dad learned the real numbers. Sullivan had been telling them the company was just working through some timing issues with the government. The same afternoon, every bank that held Sullivan's personal guarantees triggered acceleration clauses. Repo trucks arrived at the port before sunset and started hooking up the entire fleet of company-owned Kenworths and Peterbilts. By the next morning, the yacht was gone from its slip at Orleans Marina, seized under the loan Sullivan had taken against it. The house itself received only a notice of default for now because Mom and Dad had never co-signed that particular mortgage, but the writing was on the wall. Sullivan locked himself in his home office for 2 days, then made the call I had been waiting for. My phone rang at 9 at night with a Louisiana area code I hadn't seen in 8 years. His voice cracked the moment I picked up. "Landry, please. I messed up. The IRS is taking everything. $8.4 million. They're pulling the trucks right now. I'm about to lose the house too. You're the only one who understands numbers like this. You have to help me. I let him talk until he ran out of breath. Then I said, no. He started yelling about family and blood and how I owed them. I waited until he stopped, then repeated no, and ended the call. 2 hours later, Mom tried. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She kept saying Sullivan was having panic attacks and Dad hadn't slept in days. She begged me to at least look at the book, said they would sign anything I wanted, give me any percentage, whatever it took. I told her the same thing. I'm not coming. Dad called the next morning from his old flip phone voice, hoarse from shouting at lawyers who wouldn't take the case. He didn't beg. He just said, "We made a mistake. Please." I told him mistakes have consequences and hung up. For the next 6 weeks, the phone rang constantly. Sullivan, Mom, Dad, even old family friends I hadn't spoken to since high school. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages grew more desperate. Sullivan offered me half the company, then 75%, then everything, if I would just wire money to stop the seizures. I never called back. By late April, the port looked like a ghost town. Half the cranes stood idle, containers stacked 3 high with no one to move them. Former employees I once managed sent me LinkedIn messages asking if the rumors were true. I didn't reply to them either. I sat in my Dallas office watching the lien recordings update in real time on the parish clerk website. Every new filing felt like the final period on a very long sentence. Late May, I pointed my car east on I-20 and drove the full 800 kilometers to New Orleans in one shot. A senior vice president from the bank had emailed me the week before, practically begging. The bank was one of the largest creditors after the IRS, and they were desperate to avoid a total fire sale that would leave them with pennies. They sent a limited power of attorney asking me to attend a workout meeting as a neutral advisor. I printed it, signed it, and decided to see the damage with my own eyes. I rolled into the Garden District just before midnight. The big white house on Prytania Street still stood, but the circular driveway was empty, the 4 bay garage doors open and dark. Every company truck, every leased Mercedes Sullivan loved to park out front had already been repossessed. Only Mom's 10-year-old Lexus and Dad's old pickup remained. Mom must have been watching from the window because the front door flew open before I reached the porch. She looked 20 years older, hair unwashed, eyes swollen from crying. She tried to hug me, but I stepped aside and walked straight into the foyer. Dad was coming down the stairs in pajamas, moving like a man twice his age. Sullivan sat on the living room sofa in sweatpants, unshaven, staring at his phone as if another miracle might appear on the screen. Mom started talking the second I crossed the threshold, words tumbling over each other about hospital bills for Dad's blood pressure, about how the neighbors were whispering, about how Sullivan hadn't slept in a week. Dad just stood there, gripping the banister, silent. Sullivan finally looked up and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You came?" he said. "I knew you would. Look, I've got a plan. If you wire $5 million today, we can stop the IRS levy, refinance the rest, and I'll sign whatever you want. 50-50, split, 70-30, anything." I set my overnight bag on the marble floor and looked around the room. The crystal chandelier was still there, but half the furniture was gone, sold or stored to make upcoming mortgage payments. Family photos on the walls stopped at Sullivan's college graduation. There wasn't a single picture of me after age 20. I turned to Sullivan. "I'm not wiring a cent." He jumped up. "Come on, Landry, we're blood. You can't let everything we built just disappear." Mom reached for my arm. "Sweetheart, please. This is still your home." I pulled away gently but firmly. "You made it very clear 8 years ago that this stopped being my home the day you handed him the keys." Dad finally spoke, voice rough. "We were wrong. We see that now. Just tell us what you need to fix this." I looked at each of them in turn. "I don't need anything from any of you. I came because the bank asked me to witness what happens when you run a company into the ground. Nothing more." Sullivan's face twisted. So you drove 800 kilometers just to watch us lose everything that's cold. No, I said. I drove 800 kilometers to make sure I see it with my own eyes. There's a difference. Mom started sobbing again. Dad sank onto the bottom stair like his legs gave out. Sullivan kept talking, offering bigger percentages, then threatening to declare bankruptcy and drag the family name through court if I didn't help. I let him run out of steam. When the house finally went quiet, I picked up my bag. Enjoy the time you have left in this house. The auction calendar is already public. I walked out the same way I had 8 years earlier, only this time I wasn't the one carrying a suitcase full of broken dreams. 2 weeks later, the final meeting took place inside the old executive office at the port. Yellow auction notices were already taped to every gate and door, counting down 21 days to the public sale. The conference table that once hosted holiday parties now held only a single stack of documents and 4 bottles of water. Sullivan sat at the head looking like he hadn't slept in days. Mom and Dad took the chairs on his left, both staring at the tabletop. I sat opposite them. The air smelled of salt and diesel and endings. The door opened at exactly 10 o'clock. My attorney Alexandra Diaz walked in first, followed by Richard Whitaker. They placed their briefcases on the table with the quiet confidence of people who already owned the room. Richard spoke first, voice calm and professional. Whitaker Capital has acquired the entire IRS tax lien of $8.4 million for a discounted cash price of $4.7 million. As of this morning, we are the sole secured creditor with priority over every other claimant. Alexandra slid a thick folder across the table. Under federal law, we are exercising our right to conduct a public foreclosure sale of all assets of Ramsey Port Services in 21 calendar days. The auction will be held on site. All proceeds after costs will be applied to the lien. Sullivan shot to his feet so fast his chair rolled back and crashed into the wall. You can't do this. That's our family legacy. You're stealing it. Richard didn't raise his voice. We purchased a valid lien from the United States Treasury. The law is clear. Mom started crying quietly into a tissue she had been clutching since we sat down. Dad gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, but said nothing. Sullivan kept yelling about lawsuits and family and blood until his voice cracked. I waited until he ran out of air. Then I looked straight at him and said the only sentence I had come to deliver. 8 years ago, you told me to learn how to make money. I did. The room went dead silent. Even the gulls outside seemed to stop calling. Sullivan's face cycled through red, white, and red again. He pointed at me with a shaking finger. You planned this. You waited all this time just to take everything. I stood up slowly. I didn't take anything. You spent it. I simply refused to let you spend mine. Dad finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Landry, please. There has to be another way. I turned to him. There was. 8 years ago. You chose a different one. Alexandra gathered the unsigned copies of the auction notice and placed them in front of Sullivan. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow to deliver certified funds for the full $8.4 million plus accrued interest and costs. After that, the sale proceeds without further notice. Richard and I walked out together. Behind us, I heard Mom sobbing harder and Sullivan screaming my name down the hallway, but the heavy fire door closed and cut the sound off like a switch. In the parking lot, the sun beat down on rows of idle cranes and stacked containers waiting for new owners. I paused for a moment, took one last look at the sign that still read, Ramsey Port Services in fading letters, and got back in my car. The drive home to Dallas felt shorter. 4 months later, the auction was over. Every container, every crane, every square foot of warehouse from New Orleans to Gulfport went under the gavel in lots over 3 long days. Whitaker Capital bought the best pieces at market price and flipped them within weeks. The rest scattered to regional operators who had waited years for a chance at the Ramsey footprint. By the end of the month, The name Ramsey Port Services no longer existed on any sign or filing. Sullivan filed personal Chapter 7 bankruptcy the day after the final hammer fell. The court discharged most of his remaining $4 million personal guarantees, but he walked away with nothing except the clothes in his closet and a 10-year-old pickup the trustee didn't bother seizing. Last I heard, he was working the graveyard shift loading trucks at a third-party warehouse in Metairie for $19 an hour. Mom and Dad managed to keep the Garden District house because they had never co-signed Sullivan's later loans. They sold the remaining antiques, the second car, and most of the jewelry to cover living expenses and the new property tax bill. The big dining table that once seated 20 at Thanksgiving now seats 4 now, and the house stays quiet most nights. I blocked every phone number, email address, and social media account connected to the 3 of them the same week the auction closed. No forwarding address, no new numbers, no exceptions. Nathan still forwards the occasional legal notice when something needs a signature, but that's the extent of contact. I have not been back to Louisiana once. Whitaker Capital closed the year managing $1.1 billion in assets. We moved into larger offices in downtown Dallas, hired 30 new people, and started looking at ports on the East Coast. My day-to-day life looks exactly the same on the outside. Same apartment, same car, same coffee shop on the corner. The difference is, no one can touch what I built ever again. I don't feel triumph. I don't feel revenge. I feel finished. When people choose to push you out the door, walk through it and keep walking. Don't stand on the porch waiting for them to change their minds, because they rarely do. Build your own table, your own company, your own life. And when they finally come looking for a seat, remember, you don't owe them one. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If anything here hit close to home, please leave a comment and tell me your own experience. I read every single one. If you want to see more stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.